There are a couple of thoughts that I've been examining. So a main thought that has been on my mind, and I'd like to share with you. I have quite a bit to say. I'm not sure if it's going to be all done in this session. We may have to go on to a part 2, but that's all right. We'll see what happens. And I want you to consider the theme this afternoon. Life is spiritual. Life is spiritual. I was tempted to say everything is spiritual. But when we are done, we'll see. We have lived for so long in the physical world, dealing with physical things, dealing with plastic and metal and stone and iron and all of this thing, that we really believe that life is all physical. We have been so long in this physical body, that's what we think we are, that we are physical, right? But I want us to consider some thoughts as we examine the subject this evening. We were taught, and we are in agreement because we have tested and proven that we've been given 5 senses. And so the senses of hearing, seeing, smelling, touching, feeling, all makes us aware that we are here. Through our senses we interact, our physical senses we interact with the physical world. And this is the truth, that if we did not have these senses, we would not know that we exist. But today, this afternoon, what I want to do, I want us to consider some things that you probably never thought of before. I'm just thinking of a statement I read, and it's still uncertain who actually wrote it. I think they have like 3 authors that maybe Ralph Emerson is one, I think Albert Einstein is one. But here's what the statement says. It says that a mind once stretched by a new idea will never return to its former dimensions. Now, I don't know if you've proven that. I've proven that. After becoming aware of certain things, I can never go back. Do you understand what I'm saying? I can never go back. After you become aware of certain things, it's impossible. Now, I'd like to coin a kind of statement that a mind that has never been exposed to certain ideas is always cautious, and we're not always ready and willing to examine, because especially if the ideas are new, especially if the ideas are revolutionary, we are on the back foot, and we're saying we have to be careful about the things that are being said. So let me just say before we get into this, that you might not necessarily agree with the perspectives that I'm going to be sharing this afternoon. And that's all right. And that's your right to be able to look at the things that are being said. I'm hoping to present a biblical perspective of the nature of life, and as it is revealed in the Word of God. All right, so I want to start by asking you a question as it relates to you, as it relates to me. Is that a kind of echo? You get it now? No? Okay. What am I? I want you to ask yourself that question. What am I? Now, notice I didn't ask you, who am I? I asked you, what am I? What are the components that makes me up? What makes me me? Have you thought of that before? What is it that makes you you? The Word of God, the Bible, infers, and notice I'm choosing my words carefully, infers that there are 3 parts to us in terms of body, soul, and spirit. That's only found in 1 verse. So I'm suggesting that it infers. So does that mean I am a composite being? Does that mean I'm a being made up of 3 parts? Or is it true that my true identity, the real me, is my spirit? I want you to think. And I'm deliberately slowing down and ask you to think about that thought. Is it really a factual statement that my true identity is spirit? Is it true? Is it true that the Bible portrays that I, me, you, we are all spirits dwelling in a body? Is that what the Bible shows us clearly? That we are spirits, and that as spirits we are dwelling in a body. and that we don't even know we exist until that spirit is combined with the body, then we know that we're alive. In other words, as spirit, we don't know that we exist. Spirits don't live as spirits or are recognized as spirits. I listened to a sermon some long time back from a guy named Miles Monroe, and you probably have heard, he died some years back as well. Anyway, he was saying something that really made sense. He said spirits are illegal on the planet. Spirits are illegal. The only legal ones on the planet are humans or those with both body and spirit. And so much so that it was illegal for Christ to have entered on this planet, excepting first the body was prepared him according to Hebrews 10, if that is making sense. And that an enemy, a demon, is illegal except they find a body to possess. You see that? Maybe something you never thought about before. But my real true identity then is not my body. Why? It's my house in which I live. It's the house in which I live. And we could look at some verses if you so desire. We could do that. I'm sorry that we don't have the setup. I could probably just swing on there for some. But I'll give you some references. Is that all right? For references is good. I could give you references instead of we read. Or you prefer to read? Do we prefer to read? We can do that and do that quickly. So let's go ahead. It's going to take some time. I think we have both Paul and Peter referring to making references of this. We could go to 2 Corinthians 5. 2 Corinthians 5. We'll take a couple of verses in 2 Corinthians 5. But let's pick up the first 4 verses in 2 Corinthians 5. And I'll show you a couple of things here that are being said. 2 Corinthians 5. We're starting in verse 1. You can read along with me. I'll read for the camera. In verse 1, are we there? Let's go. For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, and a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this, what? In this earthly house, in this earthly tabernacle, we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. What is he saying? Look at what he's saying. If so be that being clothed we shall not be found naked. For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. What is he saying? He's saying, right now we're living in this earthly body. That's what he's referring to as a house, as he's referring to it as a tabernacle. And that's an interesting one, that every human being on the planet is a tabernacle. Every human being on the planet. But we won't take that into the New Testament perspective of the church of God. But I just want you to keep that in mind. This is what he's saying. In fact, let's go over to Peter in 2 Peter chapter 1 and see a few verses that he himself talked about there. 2 Peter, did I say? Chapter 1. Verse 12 says, 2 Peter 1, 12. Wherefore I will not be negligent to put you always in remembrance of these things, though you know them, and be established in what he calls it, present truth. Interesting. Yeah, I think it meet or necessary as long as I'm in this what now? I thought you were following. Yeah, I think it meet as long as I'm in this tabernacle to stir you up by putting you in remembrance, knowing that shortly I must put off this tabernacle, even as our Lord Jesus Christ had showed me. And he was talking about his death. The next verse actually says it. Moreover, I will endeavor that you may be able, after my decease, to have these things always in remembrance. Is that making sense? That what he's talking about here is the body in which he's living. So, remember, we are spirits dwelling in a body. I see a hand down there. A comment has been made here. Right. Well, he's talking about a new body. I was thinking that we. Not yet. That's the point he's making. So it says, in this we've grown. Correct. That's my understanding. He was referring to, we were just going back over the verse we just looked at in 2 Corinthians 5. And the point is, remember how he says in 1 Corinthians 15 that we shall not all sleep. Do you remember? We shall all be changed. Then he talked about how this mortal shall put on immortality and this corrupt shall put on incorruption. So he was talking about a change that comes, and that change is the change not in who we are, but the house that changes. The house changes where you no longer are subjected to death, but you have a house that, where he says something about whatever this house is in the heavens. Anyway, so I want you to get it. I'm trying to see if you can get the picture of the spirituality of life and not necessarily the physicalness that we are so involved with. Let's take, for example, the gospel. Do you recognize that once you establish what we're talking about here, that we are spiritual beings, that the gospel itself is spiritual? The gospel is spiritual. The gospel, what is the gospel? Is it a statement or is it a reality that something supernatural changes us? A spiritual experience where it says what happens here in 1 Corinthians, that verse that says that we are new creation. Do you know the verse I'm talking about? What does the verse say? Any man who is in Christ, is that what the verse says? Is what now? The old things are passed away, and yet we are the same people. So what is he talking about? I'm saying the gospel is spiritual. I'm saying when you think about the perspective that is before us, we are spiritual beings reacting and interacting with a spiritual being called God. And that we interact spiritually because in this room, there are spiritual beings that fills this room. Can you see them? How do you know that they're there? How do you know that they're here? Are angels in the room? See, we're not even sure. Because seeing is believing, right? That's what we say. See? But you got to be able to understand the perspective of spirituality and what we're talking about. Now, let me ask you a question, just to drag your mind a little bit. Peter said something that I want you to think about. He said something about Jesus being raised in spirit. And he says, by the same spirit, he went and preached to the spirits in prison when Noah was building the ark before the flood came. Have you read that before? That's 1 Peter 3:18. So he's talking about Jesus preaching to the spirit. Who was he preaching to? Demons? Was Jesus preaching to demons in Noah's days? And what would be the purpose for preaching to demons? So what's the point he's making? He's saying that we're all spiritual beings. And that he calls them, in those days, spirits. And how did he preach to the spirits that were imprisoned in the days of Noah? He preached to them through Noah, through the message Noah brought. Does that make sense? I'm hoping it does. I'm trying to show you that we're dealing with spirituality. And you know where I'm heading. That when the kingdom comes, it's spiritual. You see what I'm saying? We're talking about the coming kingdom, but you have to see it and understand that what we're dealing with what we're dealing with are things on the spiritual level, but not many people are able to go there. And they'll tell you, I think you're too spiritual with this one. Why? Because we have lived for too long in the physical. And so we see things based on what our senses can interact with. And if our senses don't interact, it's not real. I think that's of the enemy. There's a perspective I want you to think about, and it's a perspective of I'm trying to think of a word. Jesus says, The words which I speak unto you are spirit and are life. It's John 6. So are words physical or spiritual? Think about it. Your words, the way that we communicate, the words that we talk, we use so often, are they physical or are they spiritual? Can you, with your senses, interact with words? Yes. Here. Is that right? Okay. So, does that mean your words are physical? I want you to think. Do you know why? Because Jesus says, and every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account in the day of judgment. What is he talking about? What is an idle word? Can somebody remember that question? Because I don't want to tell you just yet. I want you to think about that. What is an idle word? And he says, every idle word, and you say, an idle word means a joke. That's what we call idle, because we're saying it's a joke. Right? But is that what he was saying? Or is there something more to an idle word than we have understood? Let me just say something here. You know what I believe? Jesus doesn't teach doctrines like we teach doctrines. I dare you that we go to the Word of God, we take the account of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, and you show me where Jesus taught doctrines like we did. He never did. He taught a lifestyle. He taught a living that was dependent on the spiritual realm. He himself was the evidence of it. You see my point? So he never did that. Man, I realized that something is wrong with me. I realized something is wrong with me. And you know what I found it to be? I read the Bible. I read the Bible. And after reading the Bible, you know, we talked about this mind that has been stretched. After reading the Bible, I realized, how can I continue to be and remain ordinary? When God sent his only begotten Son, sacrificed his Son forever. For what? For me to be ordinary? No way. He did that so I can be extraordinary and supernatural. But we don't think in that realm. Because the extraordinary and the supernatural is in the spiritual. It's not in the physical. It's not about muscles. It's not about education. It's not about wealth. It's about what? Connection. You see that? It's about connection. And how do we connect in this way? I mean, it's interesting. I'm telling you, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'm telling you, I guess it becomes easier when we begin to understand how God speaks and communicates with us. How does God speak to us and communicate with us? This is Romans chapter 8. We tried reading the verses just now. It didn't work out too well, so I'll just quote them for you. Romans chapter 8, Paul talks about how that we are, Romans 8. Yeah, Romans 8:26. You know what he says? He says that his spirit bears witness with our spirits. That what? That we are the children of God. Is it possible? Is it possible that when his spirit bears witness, when his spirit testifies as to what our spirits are made up of? I mean, there's an interesting point there I think he made before you get down to verse 26. I'd like to read it. I'm trying to think of what it said, but let's get down there and see what it says. Look at what he says. He says, did I say 20? Okay, he says, Romans 8, is that 16? Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Right, so he says that for, verse 15, he says, for we have not received the spirit of bondage. Listen to this. We have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but have received the spirit of, what's the word? Adoption, whereby we cried, Abba, Father. My question, do you have the spirit of bondage? Are you in the spirit of bondage? Or do you experience, or are you experiencing the spirit of adoption? Because he talks about these two things. Then he comes with this verse and says the Spirit knows what you have, whether you have adoption or you are genuinely sons of God. This is what I'm saying? In other words, I can say, and you can say, but who really knows? Are you seeing that? Who said this? Bob Marley says that you can fool some of the people some of the time, but what? You can't fool all the people all the time. I think, and this I know, you can't fool God any of the time. Do you agree? I think so. So let's keep that in mind as we think about this. What spirit have you received? What spirit is it that is dwelling in you? Is it the spirit of, or the spirit of? Is the spirit of? Or the spirit of? I want you to think, right? Because I'm just saying, sometimes you don't know. You don't know until you are faced with a certain decision. You don't know until that happens. Welcome. Come on in. Grab a seat. All right. If life is spiritual, if everything is spiritual, which I'm believing, then the spiritual finds its expression in the physical. I hope you're following that. If it's true that life is spiritual, if it's true that everything is spiritual, it is also true that the spiritual is first, that the spiritual have its manifestation in the physical. We look at the physical manifestation and we try to adjust the physical manifestation, and we never look at the spiritual manifestation behind the physical manifestation. Or we never look at the spiritual source and the spiritual reason for the spiritual problems. Is that making sense? Is sickness a physical thing? Sickness, is it a physical thing? I guess we say, of course it is, because we feel physical pain, Brother Howard. We feel physical discomfort, right? It affects our bodies. From the teachings of Jesus, sickness is spiritual. And you know, I can't just make that statement and leave it. You know, I'm going to give you some reasons. Now, the source of physical sickness, the source of physical things is spiritual. You ever see somebody that you just hate the person? So we don't talk like that because we're Christians, right? You say, come on, you don't expect me to answer that, right? But you know, sometimes you look like, I can't stand her. Do you know why? There's a spirit that is at work. And that's really where your problem is. But you blame the person. You look at the person. You don't hate the person. It's what is happening. It's the manifestations that are coming to the person. That is what you don't like, you dislike. And sometimes your spirit turns from certain people. And why is that so? It's because of what is in them, the manifestation that is in them. And sometimes we don't even understand it. But spirit interacts, and sometimes you're thinking, I don't understand why I feel this way towards this person. I don't understand why I'm drawn to this person. And you don't realize it is spirits that are at work. But the issue is that we don't know. Because we have no gift of the Spirit, we have no discernment, we don't know what is going on. So we begin to criticize the person. We begin to hate the person. I'm just saying Jesus had a different perspective altogether. I was looking at the story again. It's an interesting story because did you recognize that the demon-possessed boy, you know the demon-possessed boy that the disciples failed to cast out and so on, do you remember him? Do you know that that demon-possessed boy was both deaf and dumb? You go back and look at the story. I was surprised. I didn't realize it was the same person. Now, so this boy that was brought for healing and then they couldn't heal him, he was both deaf and dumb. And it's interesting. When you go and read that passage, I think it's Luke 9 that brings that one out. But Jesus rebuked the foul spirit And then he says, thou deaf and dumb spirit, come out of him. I mean, come on, we don't do that. If a person is deaf, we have pity. We think of people that we say, we have pity on them. We have pity on the parents. We never say that there is something behind it. We don't see it. So we have pity. We look and I wonder how it has been with this parent who have grown up this child, right? I mean, you have some of these kids like in the limelight, like maybe Gordon Moat or somebody, big star, musician, right? Was blind and born blind, right? And so I'm thinking, look, here's how we think. We say, you know that generally sometimes when a person is dumb, it's not necessarily that they're dumb, but they're first deaf. And because they're deaf, they don't hear. Because, repetition is the mother of learning. The way that my kids learned, and maybe you too, I did too, was what we heard. And what we heard, we try to repeat it and we mimic it, right? So most times that's really what happened. But look, Jesus comes and he looks at this situation, and what did he say? Thou dumb and deaf spirit. Come on, Jesus. You mean this was a dumb spirit and a deaf spirit? That's what he said. And the boy was healed. I suppose his father didn't think that was the case. I mean, I find this interesting. I'm looking at this. Look, Jesus found this woman in Luke 13, I think. And the word says of this woman that she was bent over and could not straighten herself for 18 years. That's curvature of the spine. Come on, we know that. It's curvature of the spine. You do an x-ray of that and you'll see it. That's not what Jesus saw. He said she had a spirit of infirmity. What is that? Tell me somebody. What is that spirit of infirmity? How can he see behind the sickness something that we don't see? Is it possible that our instruments and our technology has driven us far away from reality? There's so much so that what we're looking at are physical things and not necessarily seeing the spiritual behind it. Could that be? I don't know. I'm just asking you. Let me ask you, what about cancer? Is cancer a spiritual thing? See? We're quiet because we're not sure. Is cancer a spiritual thing? Is the source of cancer spiritual? And is it possible that just because we have lived for so long in the physical, so far from God, we don't know? So we said, you know what? Let the doctors decide it. What about diabetes or arthritis? Anything that comes to your mind, think about it. Could there be a spiritual reason behind it? Brothers and sisters, I'm telling you, we rarely ever look at the spiritual aspect of things. But there are a couple of things that happened in my life that caused me to see that there's another dimension that we're not so exposed to. When I was much younger, I had an accident. I was young and strong. And I was working with a company, and one of the vehicles broke down. I think it had a front tire that was blown, and they didn't have a spare. So we went down from the maintenance crew to get him sorted out. And I remember we were pulling these. I was pulling these down. It's not in. And in those days we didn't have air tools and these. Man, I have a Milwaukee right now. I've never seen something as a battery-operated Milwaukee that has more power than anything I've ever seen. I mean, I'm pulling truckloads with this thing in a jiffy. It's done. I'm saying, what is this? Right? I mean, we used to use air tool cans, right? Back in the days, air tools, and we have to have a real strong air tool like an Ingersoll run or something to break these lugs. But we didn't have that in those days. And what I was depending on was my strength. And man, I was just popping those things, just going down on my knees like this and boom! And the last one, who knows about the last straw? The last one, when I went down, when I came up, I felt my entire shoulder came forward. And I'm thinking, man, something terrible happened. I fell straight on my back. And I was in so much pain that if I bat an eye, I felt pain. I'm telling these guys, I said, guys, take me to the hospital. And they're laughing. I said, man, get up. You're wasting time, right? And I said, serious. And I can't speak loud because with my voice comes pain. And I said, no. I'm trying to say, no, I can't wave my hand and I can't speak loud. And one of them finally, they said, it looks like he's hurt. And so they eventually took me up with much pain, and they took me to the nearest place that we went to. I don't remember what it was now. But when the doctor came in to see me and he took off my shirt, he said I tore 13 muscles on my right shoulder. So, all right. I ended up having some leave, and then I remember I couldn't sleep on a mattress. My sister, bless her heart, I was living with her at the time. She and her husband took the mattress off the divan, and they slept on the floor, and I was sleeping on the divan. Right, but so I ended up with some back issues that every once in a while I have these issues in my waist, strange. So it's not so much here, but down in my waist. And I learned a little bit of, chiropractic work. And but I'm able to do this on others. Man, I tried to teach my wife forever how to do a lumbar roll. She doesn't get it. But she tries. Look, she tries. She does her best, okay? She does her best. All right, so my son will help. My daughter will help. But I got a round of pain that this time, nothing helps. Nothing helps. And I'm thinking, this is serious. It's serious that now I'm not able to function. I can't move. So they helped me to the bed, and I laid on the bed, and I said, please pray. Please pray over my back. And they did. And my son, my daughter, and my wife are witnesses of what happened. So my wife prayed over me, and boom, that was it. No pain. And I'm thinking, it's interesting that the pain went. That's not how pain works. If pain is physical, you have to fix. Sorry. I'm sorry. I thought I was. But my voice goes down a little lower sometimes. I hope everybody's good online. Anyway, so here's the situation. So fine, no problem. We went, I got better. I felt the best I've felt in a long time. And then months later, could be near to a year later, the same thing happened. And guess what? I went to see a chiropractor. Isn't that strange? The same thing happened. And what did I do? I went to find a chiropractor in Kingston. He did his thing. I got some ease. I came to pay, and the lady says, he needs to see you in another week. And I said, okay, another week, okay. I'm there the next week. And then she says to me, he says, you're to come back next week. And the Spirit says, how much did it cost you when your wife spoke over your back? And she's there as a witness. I never went back. Because I realized, look, we all heard the story. We all heard the story at a camp meeting like this, how this sister came and she talked about what happened to her son. He was demon-possessed. No church could help him. You remember? A few of us do. No church could help him. He was demon-possessed, and it was beyond her to handle. And she tried, and they went, and they prayed, and they did this, and nothing happened. Her son remained. And she said one day, she had reached her wit's end. One day, it was a Sunday, she was washing and she was cooking at the same time. You Jamaicans know what that's like. And she said the son came in the kitchen, and she said, he pushed his hand in the fire. And she turned off the stove. She turned the knob and she said, demon, get out of this room. I have no time for you. She knew it was a demon. And she says, before her very eyes, her son went over the fire and did this. And the fire lit. And she said she had had it up to here. She just grabbed him and she pushed her way into the living room. You all remember? And she prayed and she pleaded the blood. That's her own words. She pleaded the blood and she pleaded the blood. And she didn't know how long she was there. But she just knew it was it. This was it. She pleaded the blood and she said, finally something happened. She saw his body levitated and fell back to the ground. She looked at his face and she said, this is my son. He was healed. He was healed. 1 year went by. You remember the sad ending? I mean, the story should have just stopped there. But she said 1 year went by when the demon came back. What did she do? She went to the doctor. What was the result? Her son died at the age of 19. Why? Because we don't see the spiritual effects of the things that are behind our sicknesses. We don't see them. So we have nice words, nice descriptions. And you know, everybody I know that has a sickness, they'll tell you the scientific name of it. They believe it. I went to see my sister. Kiki and I went to see her a few years back. She was sitting in a chair. I went in the living room. She's sitting in a chair all padded with pillows. And I stepped in. I said, what's wrong with you? And she said, I'm in so much pain. I can't sleep. I said, what's your problem? She said, they say it's sciatica. I said, all right. I said, no problem. I said, that's a piece of cake for Jesus. Isn't that right, KK? So we said, stand up. Oh, man, she had pains to get up out of the chair. But we just placed hands on her and we spoke over her pain. In a few seconds, she's looking at me and she said, what did you do? What did you do? And I said, it's not me. He said, it's Jesus. Okay, so we left her happy. And I borrowed something from her. We went away, spent the entire day. We came back in the night. This is my wife and all of us. We went back to deliver, to bring this thing back to her. I go in the room. She's sitting in the chair again with the pillows around her again. And I said, what's going on? He said, let me tell you, about an hour after you left, the pain came back. Brothers and sisters, let me ask you a question. What are we dealing with? I mean, is pain able to move just at the utterance of a word and then comes back? I try to see now why Jesus said, take heed lest a worse thing come upon you. Do you remember him saying that? And what does that mean? So we said we were going to pray again. By this time, her husband was home. So everybody joined in prayer. And she said to me as a declaration, I know that when you're finished praying, the pain will go. I know, but it's going to come back. She said that. And what do you think happened? The exact thing she said happened. And she suffered for months, having to go to physiotherapy and all of this for something that was spiritual. Are you with me? I don't know if that is making sense. But just recently, last week, we had somebody on the compound here who gave us a really interesting story. And you heard me tell the story more than once. As I was moved by the story, how this guy ended up with a problem with his leg. And I won't go to all the details. But after 6 visits to the doctor, his leg was getting worse. He was walking with a stick, and this was within months. And he could not handle himself. And 6 visits, 6 injections with what was it? MRI or whatever it was that they did of his leg. And the result was the doctor said to him, he said, sir, do you have a spare leg? We'll admit you in the hospital. And that this leg would have been cut off. But here is a young man who knows nothing about God. He's not I shouldn't say that. He's not a Christian. But he remembers saying, God, you're really going to allow them to cut off my leg? God, help me, God. You know, in desperation, the things we do. He met a friend who was really a friend of his brother. And the friend looked at his leg. He said, "This is not normal." He said, "I know somebody that can help you." Gave him the number of a lady. He went to the lady. The lady prayed over him, gave his leg a bath with some herbs and whatever it was. He said it's the strangest thing he ever saw. He said maybe within 3 or so hours, the woman pulled off something off his leg that was thick like leather. And it's the first time in months he could have seen his real skin. He came and did some work on the property, walking with 2 legs. And he told me, he said, "I almost lost my leg." And the thought that came to my mind was, what if he had called for me to pray for him? Would he still have 2 legs? Let me ask you, what if he had called for you to pray for him? Would he still have 2 legs? Remember, the doctor's diagnosis was there's nothing more that medical science can do. And all we'll have to do is we'll take your leg off at the knee. Now, we say that maybe the place that he went is familiar spirit. You know how we like to classify things? We say this is so, but what choice does he have? Here's somebody in desperation. A drowning man catches after a straw. And he reached out for the thing that was right there. And he has 2 legs and can testify that God is good. Brothers and sisters, I hope you're seeing the perspective that we don't see. And that is, there is spiritual reasons behind everything that happens. No, you say, no, come on, Brother Howard. It can't be everything. I mean it. There are spiritual reasons for everything that is happening. But because we are not involved with this thing, because we're not involved with these things, because we're sitting and waiting for God to do, and how partial is your God, that some people he heals and some people he helps and others just die, is in pain. How partial is your God? You tell me what God is this that you serve and I serve and you say is good? Come on, give me a break. And you say you're the representative of this God. You say you're the body of this Jesus in this earth. And you walk this earth all about your own business, minding physical things and wealth and pomp in life. And all around you, people are dying for salvation, dying because you're suffering. The works of the devil is around you, right before your faces, and you don't see it. Give me a break. And you think this is Christianity. You think that we sit and we discuss and we debate and we say, I don't agree with that. And people are out there dying. Is that Christianity? Well, that's a Christianity that we've all become accustomed to. Is that right? That's it. John says Jesus came to destroy all the works of the devil. Have you read it before? He that committed sin is of the devil. That's what the word says. For the devil sinned from the beginning, and for this cause the Son of God was manifested. Why? That he might destroy all the works of the devil. What is that? And how is it that we don't see those works being destroyed today? Why is that? Could it be that we who were given I thought it was that we who have been given the mandate have forgotten? And some of us we never hear. Is that my time? Okay. And some of us we never hear. Anyway, let me see if I can make a last point here and wrap this up quickly. Now, sickness is not the work of God. Even though there's some deluded people that believe this, that God gives me this sickness because he wants to save me, or he wants to teach me a lesson or something. So God uses the devil and tells the devil, go inflict this person because I want to teach him. The audio, so it must be this one. Okay. That's maybe a good signal for me to wrap it up here too. All right. Let me know if we're back, and we're just going to call it quits in the last couple of statements here, and we'll just leave it there. It's back. Okay. So is this the issue? Not this. So I go back with this? Okay. I was reading a story. It's interesting. I was reading the story how that Jesus went to Peter's wife's mother's home. Anybody read that before? And when he went there, she was overtaken with a great fever. You read that too? And it said something that Jesus stood over her and he rebuked the fever and it left her. I'm thinking, come on. Who does that? Man, you have a fever. Come on. Give us a sponge bath, a cold sponge bath. You take the temperature down. So that's what we do. Especially if it's a child, if it's a young child, you say, if the temperature reaches 104, so and so, it can have brain damage. And so, we say, come, put them in the cold, but ice cold, maybe so. Oh, Jesus never did that. I think he was way behind us. I think he was probably too ancient to know about ice. I don't think he knew about ice, right? But anyway, but look at what he did. It says that he stood over her. Another translation says he spoke to the fever. King James Version says he rebuked the fever. Another translation says he spoke to the fever and it left her. You mean you can speak to a fever? You see what I'm saying? We're missing the perspective of the spirituality of the things that we're involved in. He spoke to the fever and it left her. At least not to say that even death is a spiritual effect. Do you know what happened in death? That the body separates from the spirit. Do you know what happened when resurrection comes? That when Jesus spoke to that young man, do you remember? He was going by his way, looked, he saw this woman in this funeral procession, and she was bawling. And he looked, and they said, it's her only child. He was moved with compassion. He said, lower the brayer, or whatever the word says. And he touched the guy. Life came back into him. Spirit joined back with body. And he gave to the woman her son. Even death is a spiritual experience. We describe it this way, that when the spirit leaves the body, that is death. So death is a spiritual experience, isn't that right? We don't understand it. Science can't explain it. It has nothing to do with the pumping of the heart, because they have tried that with a dead body. It has nothing to do with the moving of the lungs and the air going through the system, because they tried that too. But there's a mechanism where spirit and body is joined together, and only God can do that. That is why resurrection can only come through a man who is connected with God, an agent who is connected with heaven, and only them can speak life back into the dead. Does that make sense? I think it does. Well, brothers and sisters, I'd like to continue. I just realized I did just start touching a couple of things here, but I think I'd like to continue with a part 2 to this as we get into this understanding of warfare and what that means for all of us. But I just want to leave you with this thought that we are spiritual beings. Stop living like physical people. Stop being moved with emotions against what people says about you, and you're puffed up because he didn't speak to me properly, and I can't talk to him, and I can't look him in the eye. Where does that come from? Because there's a spirit at work, and we don't see the spirit that's at work. We see the people, and we get into hate people, and I don't like her, and that is why I'm going to stop going up there because she's there. You see what I'm saying? Because that's what the enemy wants you to think, that your enemy are the people around you. It's not true. Your enemy is the self that is here. Your enemy, your real enemy is the self that trumps its face and its existence in the face of God, not recognizing that he says we are spirits.